Welcome to the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center's Curator's Corner. My name is Thorin Tritter. I'm the Museum and Programming Director at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center, which is located in Glen Cove, New York. Before I start my program today, I want to mention two things that I've been saying in my recent Curator's Corners as well. One is to remind you our building is open. So I encourage you, if you're inspired by this program or some of the other Curator's Corners programs that I've done in the past, please come to our building. We are open, and we would welcome you to walk through our gallery and see these objects and images in person. And the second thing, as I always start my programs, just to encourage you, if you have a question, please use the Q&A function of Zoom and type in your question, and I will either respond during my presentation or at the end of the program. Okay, so I want to talk today about the video testimony that we show in our galleries of Holocaust survivor Jackie Handeli, who passed away last year. Jackie donated several items to our collection during his lifetime and offers both an inspirational story, his own story, and a story that connects to the upcoming concert in Carnegie Hall on April 20th that HMTC is helping to organize in memory of Victor Ullmann and Michel Asael. As I'll talk about in a few more minutes, Jackie Handeli, like Michel Asael, grew up in Salonika in Greece, and there are many connections between the experiences of both of these survivors. Michel Asael had a unique way of expressing what he went through, creating a symphonic poem, a musical piece that conveyed the pain he wrote. It conveyed the pain, the anguish, the suffering, and the hope that he had experienced in Nazi concentration camps. That piece of music is going to be performed for the first time ever at the Carnegie Hall concert on April 20th. I hope you'll join us, and you can find information about how to get tickets on our website. Jackie Handeli was not a composer, so he conveyed his experiences through his testimony, through his words. And I want to start back in our museum. One thing we have increasingly tried to work into our galleries over the past several years have been clips of video testimony from Holocaust survivors. This is one of the displays we have, an interactive display where people can choose to hear various testimonies. We want to share their voices describing what they experienced. They are the undeniable primary sources that lie at the heart of our ability to explain the events of the Holocaust. My colleague Avi Markowitz reminded me recently of the work of Jan Karski, the Polish diplomat and courier who smuggled himself in and out of a Jewish ghetto in Poland and a Nazi concentration camp so that he could then go tell world leaders about what was going on based on his firsthand experience, based on his own observations. He met, for instance, with British Foreign Secretary Anthony Eden, giving a detailed account of what he had seen in Warsaw and in Belgrade. He then traveled to the United States, where he met with Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who, according to Jan Karski, sat in stunned silence after Karski had shared the details of what he knew. But it was the response from US Supreme Court Justice Felix Frankfurter, who captured in words what so many no doubt were thinking. After Karski had detailed the horrors that he had witnessed, Felix Frankfurter responded, "I do not believe you." The Polish ambassador who was in the room with Karski and Frankfurter blurted out, "Felix, what are you talking about? He is not lying." To which Frankfurter responded, "I didn't say he is lying. I said that I don't believe him." Even though Karski was describing what he himself had witnessed, the things he described were beyond Felix Frankfurter's comprehension. The description was beyond belief. He didn't believe him. It would take more firsthand testimony to convince Frankfurter and the rest of the world about what was going on in Nazi Germany and Nazi-occupied Europe. Even today, 80 plus years later, we want to make sure that we are not just providing secondhand descriptions, but firsthand testimony. If you've seen some of my virtual tours or visited our galleries, you will recall that we've included testimony from various survivors in our museum, including Werner Wright, Anita Weisbord, Kathy Grease, Annie Bleiberg, and Jackie Handeli. So today, and this is one of the places where we show Jackie Handeli and his testimony. Today, I want to draw from Jackie's testimony in our museum. That's Jackie right there. By way of background, I should say that Jackie was born in 1928 in Salonika in Greece. At the time, Salonika had one of the largest Jewish populations of any city in the world. By 1900, the city was home to 80,000 Jewish residents. And even after a decline that followed World War I, it was still home to 60,000 in 1939. And even more powerful than just a large Jewish population is the fact that the Jews of Salonika could trace their presence in northern Greece back as far as 315 BCE. So by 1940, the Jewish community in Salonika had existed there for over 2,000 years. It was one of the oldest Jewish communities on the planet. But the Jews of Salonika did not all trace their roots back to families who had migrated there in 315 BCE. The city had also seen a massive influx in the 15th and 16th centuries, particularly of Sephardic Jews, who traced their roots back to Spain. Those Sephardic Jews had flourished in Salonika and had turned the city into a thriving Sephardic cultural center. Jackie later talked about that long history of Jews in Salonika, and I'll play for you what he said.
And you have to take in consideration that those Jewish people and my family, they were there since the 16th century. They lived in dignity with the Turks and with the Greeks. There was no problem. There was some anti-Semitism, but nothing like in Poland.
So Jackie grew up in a city, and I'm going to play a number of the clips from Jackie, by the way, and I know they may be a little quiet, so I'm just going to encourage you to turn up your own volume to hear them. But Jackie grew up in a city with a rich Jewish cultural history. But unlike the Ashkenazi Jews of Eastern Europe who spoke Yiddish, Jackie grew up in a Sephardic community where everyone spoke Ladino. Things changed in Salonika after the Nazi invasion of April 1941, when Jackie, the youngest in his family, only 14 years old. After a year of financial difficulties and food shortages and gradual constricting of rights, in July of 1942, the Nazis began registering the Jews of Salonika and draining their assets. Then came the forced wearing of a yellow Star of David. And here's Jackie describing how things changed under Nazi occupation.
We are under the occupation, and in the beginning, people are dying in the streets. Jewish people are not allowed to have any radio. We have to give to the German authorities, number one. Number two, telephone. We had no telephone home, but telephone in the business, telephone Jewish people cannot have. Then, one day, they came with trucks and took all the building material. They came, they load, and they left.
He's talking there about his father's business, which was a hardware store and construction supplies. The Germans didn't pay for anything, didn't ask for a receipt. They just came and took. And the next step that Jackie experienced was the creation of a Jewish ghetto in February of 1943. Jackie described watching the Jews of Salonika, whose families had lived with dignity, as he had said, for generations, being forced from their homes and into the ghettos. He said it was one of the worst things he ever saw in his life up to that point. The Nazis actually created two ghettos that you can see on this slide. The one on the east of the city was the larger one, and then a second which served as a transit camp, which was in the west of the city adjacent to the train station. The Nazis labeled the smaller one near the train station the Baron der Hirsch ghetto, naming it after the famous German Jewish banker and philanthropist from the 19th century who had used his fortune to help Jews resettle in America, among other things. The name, the Baron der Hirsch ghetto, was one of the various efforts to make the Jews of Salonika believe that moving into the ghetto was part of a larger effort by the Nazis to resettle the Jews, and that nothing more sinister was going on. Conditions in the ghetto, however, made Jackie, even as a boy, see through the Nazi ruse. Here's Jackie talking about the first day his family moved into the Baron de Hirsch ghetto.
And I go out in the courtyard, and there is a German soldier, and there's a guy there with a casket, yes, and they give him a broom. This guy was a religious guy. He was not a rabbi or anything. And they told him he should clean up the area. They're taking pictures. He's cleaning up the area. They're taking pictures. One of the SS goes and takes his head and throws it away. And then he comes with a scissor and he cuts his beard. And then they kick him in his behind and he runs away. This is what I saw. This is the first day that I arrived.
The final stage of the Nazi plan for the Jews of Salonika was enacted about a month later in March of 1943, when the Nazis began deporting the Jews of Salonika to Poland in cattle cars. Although they were told they were being resettled, the trains went to Auschwitz. 2,400 to 2,800 Jews left Salonika every 3 to 4 days, believing they were heading to something better than the overcrowded ghetto. Jackie, then 15 years old, along with his parents, 2 brothers and 3 sisters, were loaded onto the 8th deportation from Salonika. Again, I'm going to let Jackie describe what that was like in his own words.
2 o'clock in the morning, they bang in the doors of the ghetto, and we are ready with the sack, and they pushed us inside of those wagons. The trains had outside Deutsches Reich, and there were also some wagons that they had outside, it said 6 horses. And there was a slide door and a small window, okay. And inside, there is one container of water, and next to it, there is another container with all kinds of chemicals. And this is the bathroom. And there is no curtain. And the other corner, there is figs, raisins, and bread and cheese. And the worst of everything is that the cheese, because cheese, you have to drink water. We are 85 people inside of one of those wagons.
85 people in a single cattle car with 1 bucket for a toilet and 1 container of water. After the first day, Jackie said the toilet was already disgusting and spreading a stench through the car. But the trip lasted 6 more days. Jackie also reported that it was during this trip that he learned his first German words, because Nazi guards would come to the cattle car and open the doors at any stop to remove dead bodies and to take possession of any valuables that they found. And the guards would say, "You don't need this anymore." And that was the first German expression or German phrase that Jackie learned. It's a reminder that unlike German Jews who spoke German, obviously, or Ashkenazi Jews in much of Eastern Europe who spoke Yiddish, the Jews from Salonika and the rest of Greece had no knowledge of German or Germanic languages. This put them at a severe disadvantage in any number of ways, and I'll come back to it. Jackie talks about that as well. Let me get back to Jackie's story. According to Yad Vashem, Jackie's deportation train left Salonika on April 7th, 1943, with 2,800 Jews on board, and arrived at Auschwitz on April 13th, 6 days later. Finally, the train doors opened.
The train stops, and the doors are open, and there are German SS standing in lines. They have dogs in their hands, German wolf dogs, and they're barking all the time. And they are shouting all the time, raus, schnell, raus, schnell. But it's high, and we cannot jump. I mean, I am a young man, I can jump. And my father, my mother, my sisters, it takes for them time. And with the back of the gun, they're pushing the people and trying them to go down from the train.
Jackie shares a lot more information in his testimony about what happened in the first minutes at Auschwitz. It's this testimony of survivors like Jackie that scholars have used to understand the way Auschwitz worked and what lengths the Nazis used to hide the fact that they planned to kill most of the Jews arriving on those trains. The obfuscation the Nazis turned to as a way to prevent uprisings, even to the point, as you'll hear in a second, of using the Red Cross symbol on vehicles to make those arriving feel like they would be taken care of. Here's Jackie talking more about that.
Now we're all down. We are all down, and people are women separate than men, and men separate than women. And this is the last time I saw my mother. And they say anyone who cannot walk, he has to. We will take him by truck. And pregnant women, children, little women with little children, and so on. And so they have to go up into the trucks. And ones who don't feel well, we will take him to the hospital, yes? You have to take in consideration that for the 4 days we did not have any water to drink, absolutely nothing. And here we see Red Cross, and here is my father with me, and together with my two brothers. And about 3-4 minutes after, they take my father away. Why? Also SS, only the SS people, they pushed him and take him away into another line. Why? He is not young. He's not young. He is going to go with the older people. And I remain together with my two brothers.
So you hear there the details of the water running out in the train after 2 days, and of that initial family separation that took place as soon as the Jews unloaded from the trains. We now know from Nazi records that from the 2,800 Jews on board Jackie's train, 500 men and 364 women were given tattoos and processed as slave laborers, including Jackie. Of the remaining 1,936 passengers, all of those who were still alive were sent directly to the gas chambers and murdered within an hour or two of their arrival at Auschwitz. This is a photograph taken of the Hungarian Jews arriving in Auschwitz in May of 1944 that was included in the so-called Auschwitz album. Things would have been somewhat different when Jackie arrived a year earlier in April of 1943. Perhaps most notably, the train tracks then stopped about 1 kilometer or so outside the camp, not right in the middle. Today, if you go, you can find this memorial site of where Jackie would have been removed from the train cars, where his family would have come out of the train cars. Jackie and his family and the Jews arriving before May of 1944 were required to walk to Birkenau, or, as you heard in Jackie's testimony, to board trucks that the Nazis provided to help weed out those who might be strong enough to work from those who were to be killed right away. The people who were too weak to walk and who chose the option of the Nazi trucks, they were all immediately killed. But the selection process shown in the photographs from May of 1945 and May of 44, included in that Auschwitz album, those capture something that probably would have been a lot like what Jackie and his family were put through. Jackie later found out that his parents were sent directly to the gas chamber, while his sisters initially were selected for work, but he never saw them again. Jackie and his two brothers were selected for work, given tattoos, and marched to Monowitz, where the three began to work in an IG Farben factory. Jackie later described what happened there in a book that he wrote. He said, most of the Greek Jews who were not immediately gassed were sent to work in the Buna plants. Buna were the synthetic rubber plants. The first group of some 200 Salonican Jews arrived at Buna on May 2nd, 1943. Within a year, there were some 3,000 Greek Jews working there. Greek Jews suffered more than others, primarily for two reasons, he said. The first, that we were used to a milder climate, excuse me. We were used to a milder climate. The second reason was the language barrier. Ashkenazi Jews who knew Yiddish could understand the Germans. We could not. Despite their physical strength, Greek Jews died like flies. Within 3 months of our arrival in Auschwitz, 70% of us were no longer alive. Within 6 months of Jackie's arrival, both of Jackie's brothers had died of either starvation or disease. Jackie was almost killed on several occasions, but was befriended, luckily, by Jacko Razzo, a boxer from Salonika who had become an influential prisoner and who worked in the kitchen. With Jacko's help, Jackie also got a job in the kitchen. It was probably one of the best jobs that anyone could have at Auschwitz, giving him access to food and keeping him indoors. And thanks to that job, Jackie survived in Auschwitz until January of 45. Then, with the Red Army approaching, the Nazis forced Jackie and 60,000 other prisoners to march the 40 miles in the cold and snow from Auschwitz to Gleiwitz. Thousands died or were shot on that march, but Jackie survived, only to be packed into an open-top train car with no food or water for a 5-day trip to Mittelbau-Dora, a slave labor camp where the V-1 and V-2 rockets were being manufactured. As the area of Nazi-controlled Europe contracted, he was sent off to a succession of 3 other camps, finally ending in Bergen-Belsen, where he was liberated on April 15, 1945. The conditions in Bergen-Belsen were unbelievable, with dead bodies stacked, as many said, like cordwood. Jackie, age 17 at liberation, weighed 79 pounds, but he survived. Jackie managed to make it to the American sector, where he was befriended by a number of GIs who gave him clothing, food, and took him under their wing. They taught him how to drive, gave him a job as a courier. And here are a couple of blurry photos I know of him after he had recovered and was in his uniform that was given him to wear instead of the camp pajamas. For 2 years, Jackie stayed with the 787th Artillery Battalion, learning English and making friends. When that battalion finally shipped back to the States, Jackie remained in Germany, finding a way to make a living. In 1948, he moved to Israel, serving in the Israeli army for 2 years, and then getting married, having children, and starting a career. But for the next 13 years, he remained silent about the Holocaust. He later wrote, "We survivors wanted to hide the shame and degradation that we had been subject to in the camps. There was even a tendency to delude ourselves into thinking that it was all a nightmare. We wanted to build a high wall around the accursed period, that period of slavery, suffering, and pain." It was the Eichmann trial in 1961, according to Jackie, that changed his perspective. After listening to other survivors describe what they had gone through, Jackie began to talk about his own experiences. He started speaking to UJA groups, and then, based on the advice of friend and fellow survivor Elie Wiesel, started leading groups on visits to Auschwitz. After 1983, when Jackie retired, he turned his energies to educating about the Holocaust, taking dozens of groups, adults, soldiers, high school students, to Poland and giving them a firsthand account of what he had lived through. Our clips of his testimony bring into our museum the same details that he shared when he led those doors. His detail, his authenticity, convey what happened in ways that no exhibition panel or book can match. Let me finish by quoting from another survivor who's part of our exhibition, Gad Goldman. Gad survived the Lodz ghetto and deportation to Auschwitz before recovering in the Fehrenwald DP camp and then moving to the United States. Gad published descriptions of what he lived through in several places and included the following words to explain why it was important for survivors to share their testimony. Gad said, "It's very painful for Holocaust survivors to repeat these stories, but the stories must be told. We tell the story because it's our obligation. We were there when our brothers went to the gas chambers. How we escaped, we don't know. And they told us that whoever survived should tell the story to the world. All people who know about it have the obligation to tell the stories. You must tell the next generation. I heard it from a survivor. He told me what happened to him, so it should never happen again." That's why we share Jackie's testimony, along with the stories of Gad Goldman and many other survivors. We want our visitors to say, I heard it from a survivor, and I will work to prevent it from ever happening again. I will stop there. Thank you for watching. Of course, if you have questions, please type them in. Before I get to them, let me just mention a couple of our other upcoming programs. This coming Sunday, we have the next program in our Sunday with Survivors series, this time with Holocaust survivor Judith Steele, who will share information about her family's departure from Germany on the infamous SS St. Louis, when Judith was an infant, and their forced return to Europe and subsequent detention in the Gurs internment camp. She'll also talk about her father's successful effort to sneak Judith into hiding with a Catholic family, enabling her to survive. Next Wednesday, I'll be back for my next Curator's Corner to talk about an April 1937 issue of Der Stürmer, the anti-Semitic newspaper that was widely circulated in Germany in the 1930s that we have in our museum. Then on Tuesday, April 19th, we'll have the first program in a new 4-part spring series that we're starting entitled Laughing at Ourselves, Humor and the Immigrant and Minority Experience. This first program will be with Chinese-American comedian Jocelyn Chia, who's going to share how she weaves her own immigrant story into her comedy and the reactions she's got from it. And one last program to mention, the one I mentioned at the start, on April 20th at 8 p.m., HMTC's concert at Carnegie Hall will take place in person, of course, which will include the world premiere of Michel Asael's Auschwitz symphonic poem, written in Salonika in 1948, but never performed before. So you can find a full list of these programs and all our programs on our website at www.hmtcli.org, and then click on the events tab. I hope you'll also go to our website and make a donation to help sponsor our continued public programs. Okay, let me look at your questions. I see there are a few. Hold on one second here.